on and off.
Maybe
Okay.
so.
I
I'm
think
not,
it is now.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
Okay.
good.
Go ahead.
Are you doing it?
Yes, we're good.
Okay, we're recording. So we'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. Would all who wish join the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Let's see. I don't think we have any agenda adjustments. Do you have any, Meredith?
I do not.
Any other board member ever requested agenda adjustment? Okay, next up is officer elections. It was a little unclear with Leo still pending if we should have done this right after the election or wait for Leo to be seated, but to be perfectly honest, I never even thought about it. I was just so busy with COVID, I forgot about it. So we ended up, so Leo's part of this process. First step is electing a chair. I would be happy to serve as chair again. I don't know if there's anybody else who would like to run for chair.
I have no interest in running for chair, and I am happy to nominate you for chair since you're willing to do it, unless anyone else wants to throw their hat in the ring as well.
Don't see anybody jumping up, so is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we have to do things by roll call. All those in favor of the motion, start with you, Aaron.
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Leo?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I'm going to abstain. Next up is vice chair. You've done a good job, Jake. Are you willing?
Yes, I'm willing unless someone else wants to do it. And if in that case, I will gladly step aside. But if it's desired, I'll do it.
I nominate Jake to be vice chair.
I second.
So we'll go through a roll call again. Aaron?
Aye.
Leo?
Aye.
Jake?
Abstain.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Policy committee, we can have up to 2 board members. It's been Mark and myself in the past. I'm happy to continue to serve, but don't know if other people want to serve.
I'm also willing to stay on, but more than happy to step aside for anyone else who wishes to serve on that committee.
I would be very happy to nominate Brian McGill and Mark Brewer for that committee if no one else is interested to sit on that committee.
I second.
Okay, we'll take a roll call. Start with Aaron.
Aye.
Leo?
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Mark?
Are we voting on the 2 of us as a block?
We are. I don't know.
All right. I'll abstain then.
Yeah, I'm also going to abstain. Next up is curriculum committee. I think that was Jeff and Mark.
Yes, I'm again, same thing as last time. I'm happy to continue serving. I'm also happy to slide over if somebody else would like to slide in there.
I mean, I've been attending ex officio as the board chair in the past and happy to do that in the future. So if somebody else wants to, there's definitely a slot. If truly nobody else wants to, I could just take the other slot, but
Who did you say it was before?
Jeff
Was it Jeff?
Wingard. So basically, I think it falls right on top of your head, Leo. It's 1 meeting a month.
I would be willing to serve.
I would make a motion that Mark Brewer and Leo Kenny as the curriculum committee reps. Is there a second?
I second.
Okay, we'll go ahead and take a vote. Aaron?
Aye.
Leo?
Yes, I'll abstain.
Jake?
Aye.
Mark?
I'll abstain.
I will vote aye. JPD, Joint Professional Development Committee. This is a meeting, I think it's 4 times a year with the union. Jake and I have done this in the past. I'm happy to serve, happy to let somebody else serve.
I feel the same way. I'm happy to continue to serve or happy to let someone else if they so feel led.
I have no desire to serve on that committee.
Okay, I'll take a motion then.
I move to nominate Brian McGill and Jake Eckert to, what is this, JPD? I
Yep.
believe.
I second.
All right, how do you vote, Aaron?
Aye.
Leo?
Aye.
Jake?
Abstain.
Mark?
Aye.
I abstain. Spruce is next. That has been Jake. So,
Yeah, nope, same thing. I'm happy to continue to do it, or if someone else wants to, that's fine too.
what about 2 meetings?
Oh, I'm
2 or
sorry.
3?
Yeah, 2 to 3 annually, correct?
Happy to nominate Jake to serve if no one else is looking.
Oh, that was pretty quick on your part, Leo.
Oh, sorry.
I second.
Yeah. So we'll go ahead and take a vote. Aaron? How do you
Aye.
vote? Leo, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jake, how do you vote?
Abstain.
Mark, how do you vote?
Aye.
I
Aye.
also vote aye. No, I was just teasing you, Leo, because you clearly took yourself off the list very quickly. This is not your first rodeo, I know. All right, UTC. Aaron has been doing that.
I'm happy to continue. I enjoy it, but I know Leah was doing that before, so.
I would nominate
Okay.
Aaron for representative to UTC.
And I would second.
Okay, how do you vote, Aaron?
I abstain.
Okay, Leo, how do you vote?
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. Wellness Committee, 1 board member serves on that. That has been Aaron.
Yeah, and I'm happy to continue either way.
I would nominate Aaron to be the board rep to the Wellness Committee. Is there a second?
I will second.
Aaron, how do you vote?
Abstain.
Leo?
Aye.
Jake?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. And we come to the last one, Stipend Committee, which has also been Aaron.
Hey, Brian, have we had 2 members on that previously?
That's a good question. Has
We-
it been?
We were just having 1, but then last time Jeff and I were both on it just because we were missing, but I don't think Jeff ended up coming maybe to 1.
Yeah, I don't
I've-
remember historically when Jake was on it.
Yeah, I've done it in the past, but I can't remember if there was anyone else on it with me.
I'm
Shauna?
looking at my notes right now, but I don't know. I thought it was 2 the last time.
Yeah, I've never been on that committee. I know that we did 2 last time. I seem to remember at some point in the past it was 2, but I could be wrong on that.
I mean, 2 is not a bad thing, even if it's only to make sure that we have at least 1 person who can show up at any given point.
I think that's why we switched it to 2. I think it had been 1 and then we went to 2 just because it was, I had a lot of conflicts at that time.
I haven't heard.
It's back to me now that maybe that's why we did it, because neither of you could commit to full attendance.
But then this year I've been able to go to them almost all, I think.
How often is it meeting?
Well,
It's-
it meets typically 4 times a year. Shauna, chime in if I'm saying this wrong. This year we met more because it was a negotiation cycle, but in a typical year, Shauna sets those meetings early in the year, and I think it's 4.
It traditionally is 4, except during a negotiation year when it's maybe 5, just because of the amount of work in that 3rd year.
I think, Leo, if you want to do it, it would go to weekly, though.
No,
If you want a token alternate, I would do that.
Okay, I would nominate Aaron and Leo as representatives to the Stipend Committee. Is there a second?
I'll second.
How do you vote, Aaron?
Abstain.
Leo, how do you vote?
Abstain.
Jake?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. So unless I'm missing an office that somebody remembers, I think that settles us. The building committee is ad hoc, so I think that, although we could open that up if people want to. I don't think it officially had a term that ended right now, but more than happy to open that up if somebody wanted to. Right now it's myself and Mark.
I am interested in that committee. If it can, you can't have 3 though, so never mind.
No, it's an open meeting. We advertise the meetings, so you can show.
Oh.
It's open to the public. You can show up if you want.
Okay.
The other thing I
Yeah,
would say about that group is that we are moving into a new phase of work, obviously. And we've discussed with the architect team that we need to talk as a building committee about what our structure looks like for our local feedback loop moving forward, which will be the topic of our next meeting. So it's probably best to wait until after that meeting until we have a plan for our committee structure moving through construction phase to make a change of official membership.
That sounds to me like a wise time to revisit membership if needed. So why don't we go ahead and table that? But it is a agended and advertised meeting open to the public. So only 2
Right.
board members can vote. But honestly, we don't vote on things that often at the moment, the way things have been anyway. So it's open to anybody who wants to come, however.
Fine by me.
Okay. And so I think that does us. So in the end, not a lot of changes, but maybe sometimes stability is a good thing. Sometimes so let's see. So we have 2 sets of minutes. We have minutes for April 7th. I would make a motion to approve the minutes for April 7th as presented. Is there a second?
A second.
Did anybody have corrections or changes? Seeing none, we'll move to a vote. How do you vote, Aaron?
Aye.
Leo?
Abstain.
Okay, Jake?
Aye.
Mark?
Aye.
I also vote aye. And we have the minutes.
I only see 1 set of minutes, Brian.
I only got 1 finished. I had high hopes that I would have the others done in the short
Okay.
period of time, but I only got those out, so I'm sorry.
I hear you've lost power again too, which doesn't help.
No, it's a crazy world out here.
Yeah, okay. So next up we have warrants. So those were in our packet and they've all been signed by email too. I would make a motion to approve regular warrant 21, payroll warrant 21, April purse, and bond warrant number 11. Is there a second?
I second.
Any discussion? Okay, how do you vote, Aaron?
Just-
Aye.
Leo, question?
That was before me, right? I saw those warrants and I saw email signatures and stuff, and I know I didn't do any of that. So I abstain, right?
I know you didn't sign. You probably, yeah, that probably was.
Jeff's name is on them, so I assume they were
All right.
before, but I don't know that.
Yes, you're on the
Yeah, I'm
next
not.
one. The one that will be going out for this warrant, Leo is on.
Okay.
Okay, so you
Just double
abstain.
checking. Abstain.
Jake,
Aye.
Mark,
Aye.
I also vote aye.
I don't know if Aaron voted.
Oh, did I? She did before
I
Leo's
did
question.
before Leo's comment.
No, I got it.
All right, so we are now to public comment. Would anybody like to make a public comment? Go ahead and just give things a minute in case somebody's unmuting, but it doesn't. I don't see anybody. Looks like they're doing it. Okay, we'll go ahead and move on to acknowledgements. You want to start, Aaron?
Gosh, why am I always so unprepared for this? And you always start with me.
I know
Um,
you're over on the left. Still
Uh,
in my mind, even though you're a random square now.
I would like to acknowledge how wonderful it was to have a little bit of a vacation, even though it didn't seem like it should have been that big a deal. It was nice for everyone, and I hope that all of the school personnel got a little break too.
Great. Anything you want to acknowledge, Leo?
Yeah, I was just looking, of course, I don't know all of the, I guess, correct people. I know we heard from Cammie Carter that a group, including alumni, Sam Ronco, school counselors, have been collecting gift cards and have collected gift cards and sent out to over 50 families. I think for groceries and other necessities. So this is a terrible job on my part. I don't know exactly who all is involved, but it's our school community and is awesome that they've pulled together and done this, and maybe someone can clean that up a little for me.
I think you got most of the key players. Jake?
Yeah, I'd like to acknowledge the staff at ASA who volunteered their time over break to do virtual recess and virtual meetings so that kids could get together and spend some time virtually with their friends. So I know it was during vacation week, so I appreciate them for volunteering their time to allow those kids to do that. I know it meant a lot to those kids.
Mark?
Yeah, I'd like to just echo what Jake just said. I think, Lisa and everybody else who helped organize that and then kind of supervised it over vacation wasn't really great for those kids. I know that my kids thought that was wonderful. Being able to interact with their friends was pretty big deal for them. So I want to acknowledge that work. And then I meant to do this last time and I didn't. So I'll do it now. I want to acknowledge Leo for actually being willing to step up and do this again. I don't know how many times separately he's now been on the board, some elected, multiple times now stepping in to fill a gap. Anybody who's done this recognizes how much work it is, and it's a lot more work when there's a seat open because that's one fewer person to do things. And so being willing to do it, especially when you know how much work it is, being willing to do it, and getting someone who can really hit the ground running is a big deal for us. So I want to thank Leo publicly for being willing to do this.
Yep.
Yeah. Happy to do it.
Great. I don't think I have anything additional, so I would just second what everybody said. Meredith, did you have anything?
Yeah, I would just follow on with what Leo acknowledged. I know that there have been donations from many members of the community, and the group that Leo mentioned has been working to connect these resources with people who can use them right now. Specifically, I want to mention, because they contacted me to make this donation, the local Kiwanis Club was a part of the donations and went to, great efforts to bring us some gift cards to be able to use in that. So I want to specifically mention that group as part of the force that donated to what Cammie and Sam and Troy and Holly and Peter and Lisa and others have been working to get out to our school community. Secondly, I would just like to acknowledge the efforts of Brent Fournier. Brent has been working really diligently with our architect team, really to be their scout on the ground, to provide lots of information that they needed to finish up their the drawings and the bid documents, along also doing helping to coordinate the sanitizing our facility and keeping track of who's coming and going. And so there's just been a lot happening lately, and so I want to acknowledge his work and efforts around all of those kind of plates that are spinning right now.
Great. I see we have a student rep. We've got Zoe. Does anything you wanted to acknowledge?
No, I just like to second everything that's been said.
Okay, great. Anything we missed? So we'll move to reports. Looks like in the agenda, we have superintendent report first.
Sure. Most of what I have to report falls under our discussion items, so I will save most of that for there. I would just say that kind of as an overarching piece, the governor's press conference today is very new information. And, you know, there's some pieces of that I think that are indicated that will be specific to us. And I also got a email from the commissioner today, superintendents did, just indicating that there will be more information coming to superintendents in the near future. So, you know, we will take in information as decisions are passed down and make sense of those in terms of how they impact our, you know, upcoming programs and kind of decisions that we'll have to make based on new information from the state. So I don't have a lot to add to what was in the, came out today in the press conference, but I think everything else falls under the other two items. So I'll defer the rest of my report for then.
Okay, we'll go on to principal reports. Go ahead and start with Darren.
Okay. I did want to say, we've already touched upon virtual recess. I think it's a great support for social emotional learning for our students. We are gathering some data to find out how effective that is and how we can essentially fill the gaps that students are feeling in this age of social distancing. But I think it's been a significant success. I would also add under school culture, most recently, I attended a seminar for a program entitled Teachers Pay Teachers, and that will enable our staff to secure online access without any cost until June. And that provides a wide range of materials, K through 5. And I do want to thank Kim Oldenburg for designating a shared document to kind of make sure there's equity, that everyone's getting what they need. And it does include all content areas. I would like to share some exciting news. I put this under vision of academic learning. So in response to a principal's survey regarding equitable access for remote learning for all students, the Maine Department of Education delivered 120 Chromebooks to Asa C. Adams. So it is important to note that the students do have access, every student. However, this resource should enable us to have one-to-one access for next year for all students K through 2. That was really the demographic we were asked for, as 3 through 5 are provided for. There is no cost. This is, I think the cost would have been in the area of $20,000, but the Chromebooks are ours to keep and to use as we see fit to help us in the area of remote learning. So it's exciting stuff. They were delivered on Friday. Last I looked, they were in my office. I can no longer fit in the office. And I think they will, again, be deployed probably next year, since the pre-K through grade 2 students are currently using iPads. We thought it would be probably too disruptive to make a switch so late in the game. We'll look at how they will be dispersed next year, and also just a projected use of how they'll be used. We'll have a discussion at the next staff meeting. So kudos to the state for their very decisive leadership here, helping us secure this. It's, I think, a substantial gain for us. All right. Also, I should mention, I will be forming committees this week. Some of you may be hearing from me very shortly to interview. We will do this via Zoom for the following positions: librarian, art teacher, grade 5 teacher, and a pre-K teacher. So we're forming those committees now. I'm hopeful to group those, the specialist, librarian, and art teacher in one day, and hopefully the grade 5 and pre-K teacher in one day as well. And finally, I should say that the ASA staff was notified about their renovations in an email from Superintendent Higgins on April 23rd, and it really addressed details such as timelines, mounted technology, LCDs and the sort, and packing. So we are indeed moving a number of people, so that work is just beginning now. So there's a lot of, I don't know, overlapping disruption, I suppose, but all for the good. That's about what I have.
Thank you. Any questions?
I just had one question. Darren, I was just wondering if you could tell us a little bit, there's a couple of different points in your report where you talk about the staff has been discussing and exploring a move to adding more synchronous learning components. And I was just wondering if you could say a little bit more about that for us.
Well, we've been trying to assess, Mark, just how much in-time communication we're having with students. And it can be a difficult thing to manage simply because you don't have a set schedule. We found that some students log on in the morning, others in the afternoon. Depends on parent care and so on. But there has been a pretty good use of real-time or synchronous learning where students, or rather teachers, are doing read-alouds with the students and trying to connect with them in time. It's a little difficult, as you can imagine, but I do want to commend the staff. I think I made a rather generic approach to them saying, I think we need to move towards that direction. And in fact, a lot of that is already happening. Some teachers do pre-record things and then they'll do the response sessions after the fact, which we find is a little easier than doing a full-scale presentation. You also have to factor in that if there are a number of students, doing that remotely becomes a little more difficult. I will say also, most of the teachers are doing one-on-one, or many teachers are doing one-on-one communications with students. We actually check in with them. So yeah, we've talked about it. It's just a question of getting a sense of where we are. I mean, that seems to be the overriding question. It's not as if we have a rubric to attend to or something of the sort.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any other questions? All right, go on to Richard.
Okay. Well, I want to follow on what Darren's footsteps there. He reminded me about our interview process as we begin to prepare for next year. We are beginning interviews for our English Language Arts long-term sub position, 7th grade position, and our first round of interviews starts on this Thursday. As I noted in our board report, we're well into beginning end of the year planning. A lot of that involves preparations for next year, but also the majority of that conversation is on how we wrap up the current school year and what we do for students to recognize them in a variety of ways. I kind of have a summary, 8th grade recognition and awards, how we do that, 6th and 7th grade end of the year awards, field day opportunities, step up for 5th grade. That's an important one, and how we conduct that this year. And then some basic housekeeping things. We're working with Melissa Barton on laptop collections, and Chad Kirkpatrick. He and I have been talking about locker clean out and some of those. I've worked with Emily on library book returns, etc. So that planning is well underway. Over the course of the last 5 weeks during coronavirus, so over the years as a school principal, I've learned through experience about the importance of communication with parents and community members. And so I highlighted on my board report a list of like the major communications that with links to what those documents are. I thought that might be helpful for you to so you remain current with what we're doing for communication. And I would say those have been well received and are helping us navigate this as smoothly as possible. The fourth quarter grading expectations. It's overall, I'd say it's gone pretty smooth. I've had a small number of inquiries around expectations, but I'd say that was a small number, 4 to 6 inquiries about that. And some of my more recent communications with parents and community members address those concerns. And let's see, what else? Mark, you asked about the Friday schedule. So I believe this Friday marks the third Friday that we're, and actually I want to point out that first Friday was, I think we started the new schedule on Wednesday. So we didn't have much time on that first Friday. But the expectations are pretty clear. And we've discussed this in our last 2 staff meetings the last couple of weeks. So students are expected to work on and submit school assignments, mainly through Google Classroom, and submit those. Teachers are making themselves available with open times. They're posting Google Meeting links on their Google Classroom so they can meet and check in with individual students. So that takes up a good part of the day. We set a time aside to have like smaller teacher meeting groups, like in grade level teams, content area specific teams. We're involving Peter Buhner, our guidance counselor, in those meetings. And those discussions center on what students are we not meeting their needs like adequately, or that we feel like they're at risk for one reason or another. Maybe it's attendance, maybe it's they're struggling for a variety of reasons. And then when we break out from those meetings, we're using those opportunities to reach out and make sure that those students are connected to school. So I'd say that is an important part of our Fridays. And then of course teachers are engaged in updating grade books and assignments and that type of work. So Fridays have been pretty busy, and I would say they are perhaps our busier day of the week in that regard.
I saw that in your report, Richard. I wanted to thank you for putting that in, and I'll do the same for Reg before he comes out. That was very helpful, and it seems like those Fridays are definitely being well used. Thank you for ensuring that, and also for putting it in your report, both of you. I think that's great.
Thanks. I appreciate that. And yeah, it's a good use of time. And I think one of the challenges that I find with nobody being in the building is, I used to be able to go upstairs and, and get somebody on the same page. And this process is much more challenging to do that. And I think like we're generally following our schedule, like class meetings happen at the time they are on the schedule. I would say one inconsistency is some teachers post the meeting link, the night before. Others post it more closer to the meeting time. So I think some of those smaller inconsistencies are, posing some challenges for students to remain connected. But we're working them out, as they come up. But it's definitely a work in progress. I wanted to point out also that we've been undertaking the Birch project this year, and I know I updated you every month on my principal's report, and I'm happy to report that the project is on track to finish successfully. Okay, we have one more student survey that we're going to undertake in the next couple of weeks, and that should wrap it up. So it was a little up in the air there for a while when we first went into remote school, but it's on track. So that's glad to report that. So that's what I have for today. Any questions?
Just a maybe quick question on that Friday. What is the expectation for scheduling for students? Are they expected to check into every class? And I'm sorry if this was in the report. I did not see it.
Yeah. No, that's a great question. So a number of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, in fact, we decided we were going to align with the high school as far as running our maroon and white schedule. Okay, so on Monday through Thursday, we run our regular maroon white schedule. And on Friday, at both the high school and the middle school, it's more of like a flex day, you know, where we felt like in the remote school setup that it would be advantageous to provide students the opportunity to meet with teachers without following the regular schedule, okay? And so it's like a kind of a check-in day, if you will, where teachers can reach out to individual students, small groups of students, and make sure that they're not falling through the cracks and you know, keeping caught up the best they can. So it's more of a flexible day that we built in purposefully for that purpose.
Okay, because I will say that you know, I've got an 8th grade boy who may not be the best communicator.
Yeah.
But trying to figure out what he is supposed to be doing on Fridays was not that clear for me. But that doesn't mean it wasn't clear for him.
Yeah.
But I would like to, I guess, understand. That's what I was just trying to understand. Like, what is it supposed to be? Are they supposed? If there's no schedule, I guess maybe it is a little murky.
It is. Now, I would say for a student who's on track and doing well, generally, what they should be doing is checking into the individual teacher's Google Classroom, working on assignments, and submitting those. I would say, in a general sense, the majority of students, that's what they should be doing. Okay, and they'll be fine. Students that are at risk, teachers we work with teachers, Peter Buhner and myself, and identify students who are at risk, and then part of that day is spent reaching out to those students and connecting them with some of the resources that we have in place. But generally, right, students in good shape should be working on assignments and submitting them.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you. Reg?
All right. I'll start with, I do just want to acknowledge, you know, teachers for their work. You know, they continue to design lessons that just haven't been part of their repertoire since they've been teaching. And really being creative and doing an awesome job. And then the students who keep showing up. I really wasn't sure when we returned from April vacation what attendance would be like, you know, yesterday and today. And both days, I mean, on my report, I put 90%, you know, over 90%, but it's really like 95%. It's like a typical, you know, day's attendance, you know, when we're here at school. And so, and we do track attendance. We're not tracking it in Power School every day, but teachers report it to Sam Runco. She tracks down whether a student was excused or sick. And so by the end of the day, we have maybe 8 or 10 students that, you know, that we need to still track down. So I just want to acknowledge that students continue to do a great job. Teachers are working hard and doing a great job. And so I just wanted to say that, you know, it's graduation planning, end of year recognition planning. That's really front burner for now until the end of the year. You know, we were notified by the university over vacation, really at the beginning of vacation, that the university wouldn't be hosting any events on campus through at least the end of July. And we were kind of holding out hope that maybe the Collins Center would be available for something, or maybe the football, you know, something on campus. But so even though it's disappointing, it is helpful in our planning to know that that's not going to be an option, anything on campus. So I did send out a survey to parents and seniors yesterday. I did attach a copy of that. And the ideas on there are just some of the common ideas that are floating around out there with not just schools in the area, but kind of nationwide. These are some ideas that are gaining a lot of traction. I have met with the area principals, high school principals, and we're tossing ideas around and brainstorming. So that's been helpful. Once we get the survey results back, kind of the end of the day on Thursday, I'm going to put together a planning committee that will be you know, class advisor, the class officers, a couple teachers, a couple parents, guidance, just a representative kind of advisory committee to finish up the planning for graduation. So we're on that. Not sure what it's going to look like quite yet, although based on the survey, it's starting to take shape a little bit in my mind, but I'm going to let that go through Thursday. So then the other thing is, traditionally we have our baccalaureate for seniors. We have our underclass recognition ceremony that includes book awards and just recognition of academics and athletics and performing arts. That we're going to try to figure out how we recognize students, not just the seniors, but also underclassmen. And so we're going to have a teacher committee put together to see what we can do around that. And so I have a lot of confidence that will go well also. Mark, you mentioned, Richard was just mentioning kind of our Fridays, but just in general, for the fourth quarter, we're continuing with our kind of 4 days of synchronous online instruction, Monday through Thursday. And then on Friday is an asynchronous day. And typical Friday for a student, we do expect them to check in to each Google Classroom. It doesn't need to be from 9 to 11, but I'm recommending students do that. 11 to kind of the end of the day is time to work on their ongoing assignments, but also teachers are available to email. But a lot of students are actually having Google meetings with individual teachers, and so getting a lot of feedback of that happening, and that's kind of what we hoped would happen. And so for a teacher, they're expected to, by 9 o'clock, for each of their Google Classrooms, post a short, I call it an assignment. I think that might have kind of flipped some teachers out. What do I mean by an assignment? But it really is just, can be a quick question. It can be a writing prompt. It can be solving a problem or an equation. It can be a practice SAT question, but something that kind of keeps them engaged in the work of that week. Gives them a way so that they're checking in with their teacher. And the rest of the day for a teacher, they are keeping in touch with their Google Classrooms and email, meeting with students via Google Meet, responding to student emails, lesson plans, grading. And I'm asking teachers to have that weekly progress grade entered by the end of the day on Friday. And so far, that's been happening. And hopefully April vacation was a nice respite for everyone, and we'll fall into a nice little routine with this, now that we're back and heading into the home stretch. The other thing around academics, some anecdotal, at least maybe some student comments around workload. And so I put a survey out that week before April vacation to get an idea for what is the amount of work being assigned. And I thought it was a good response. About just under 40% of students responded. And I attached the results of that survey. So big picture, I was pleased with it. As a voluntary response survey, I expected a little bias on the end of we're getting too much work. But the survey didn't seem to reflect that. Or if it did overrepresent we have too much work, it still seemed reasonable, the responses. So I'll stop there and open it up if you have any questions or comments. Or
Thank you. Any questions?
For the Fridays, I think the students are a little confused right now because a lot of teachers will have like the week's work due on Fridays, but I think in all of my classes and all my friends' classes, like everything is due by noon. And I think we were all a little under the impression that like it was supposed to be an entire day to work and to meet with your teachers, but I'm not quite sure if I'm right on that. Or
well, yeah, that wasn't part of the part of the discussion with teachers. There was no discussion around work needs to be done at noon. Work can certainly be ongoing over into the next week if there's an ongoing project. So I guess I'd be curious, Zoe, not in this forum, but if you could just shoot me an email around maybe what classes you're talking about, and because I think that might be maybe specific instances and maybe not kind of a general sense, because there was no directive around work needs to be due on Friday, and then you know. So
Yeah.
I'd be curious to get just some more details.
Yeah. Okay.
I had a question. I don't know if it's for Reg or maybe for Dr. Glenn Cross as well, and maybe for Darren Ackerman as well. Do we know what percentage, is there a percentage of students that do not have consistent full-time internet access?
Yeah. It's in the like 1 or 2.
1 or 2?
Yeah.
At high school or overall, or maybe Meredith knows.
I can speak to the middle school. Reg, go ahead and finish up.
Yeah, it's and the 1 or 2 are ones that are chronically absent, tend to be kind of truant students. So it's less. The bigger issue is that it's not it's not access to a device or internet access. It's more around just willingness to engage and attend. So
wow.
Yeah, we have devices. Kajit is the device that we have that's just a wireless internet hotspot. Yeah. So and we have more than we need. So we have plenty in our district for people who needed those. Initially, we thought there was a greater need, but people began to problem solve and figure out how to accomplish that. So we've circled back to families that initially were having some problems to see if they could still use a Kajit, like if they ended up going to a family member's house to use internet when we didn't have enough Kajits. But we have a surplus of them right now. So we're working to make sure that everyone who needs one gets one. So at this point, everyone has the opportunity to get one of these devices if needed. Not everyone.
Wow.
People who have initially needed them.
At the middle school, we have 2, and one kid, we made an arrangement with the grandparents. They live nearby, and he goes over to grandma's house during the day, does the schoolwork. So that works out very well. Another student, the second student, they choose for family reasons not to have internet, and that's how they like to do it. So we offered some options, but they prefer paper material. So we make regular deliveries and pickups with regard to collecting assignments. And then I had another 2 students, students with special needs, I might add, that are opting. They have internet access, and we tried it, but they're opting for paper assignments. It's an organizational thing that's easier for them, and so we're being flexible. So that's how we stand at the middle school.
And I would say our numbers are pretty much along those lines too. It's a minimal amount of students, maybe 1 or 2, but it's more about access, whether they log on or not. So, and we are meeting many of the needs, Leo, with some students do require the hands-on paper packets. So we're doing, I think special ed in particular is doing a wonderful job with that. So I don't think any student's going without. That's where we are.
Wow. Okay. Thank you. That seems amazing to me, actually. And maybe it's like that all across the state. I don't know, but that's
It's not.
It's not.
Wow.
This district's commitment to technology investment. Nobody can claim to have planned for this particular event, but it's worked out very well. And even neighboring districts have had much larger fractions without computers, and then it just makes it really hard to keep the kids on the same page and the teachers able to move the whole class forward at the same pace. So I won't say lucky because it was a choice to invest, but it's worked out very well for us. Between that devices, but also access, that's awesome. Thank you, guys.
And I will say the other element was just we jumped on this as soon as we could. We didn't delay in implementing remote learning. We were on it, and I think the schools that did delay are having a hard time getting students engaged now.
Well, we had the whole weekend, didn't we?
Whole weekend, that's right.
Yeah, exactly. No problem.
I had one question on this topic. I know Spectrum had a deal where they would hook up families with kids for free for, I think it was 1 month or 2 months. Do we anticipate any families that are on that deal that are gonna lapse out and have to start paying? Do we know of any situations like that?
Not that I know of.
None that I'm aware of.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that we're aware of any, but the each school team, you know, the administrator and or the counselor are really working closely with teachers to identify students who are not engaged, to troubleshoot, you know, what might be causing that. So if we learn of those, as I said, we do have some surplus Khajiit devices that we could get out to families if there are needs that arise moving forward. You know, I really don't have a sense for how many families took advantage of that offer from Spectrum. But if there are those who lapse out of that free coverage, we have a number of devices to help.
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Any
I
other
wouldn't be
questions for
surprised.
Rich?
I wouldn't be surprised too if now that we know, I mean, when Spectrum made that offer, it was unclear how long we were going to be out for. Now it's clear that we're going to be out through the end of the year. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they extended that offer. I mean, they extended access to some other broadcasts or cable, not broadcasts, television services already at least once. So I wouldn't be surprised if they did this as well, especially if there was maybe a little bit of an outcry or request for them to do so.
Wouldn't be a big extension just to get to the end of the school year at this point. So
I think what it would buy them in goodwill and positive publicity would be well worth it. So I would think that would be a relatively easy one for them to do.
Yep. Any other questions for Reg or on this topic? Zoe, I don't want to put you on the spot because you probably didn't prepare a report, but is there anything you wanted to raise?
No, I think I've said everything that I need to.
Okay, thank you for doing so. I did just want to note, we heard hires mentioned in several cases that, and I know it's been a crazy busy time. It's always a crazy busy time at the end of the year, but especially this time around with the events. But hiring committees, the policy, I forget the exact wording, but the intent is that there be notification to the board of hiring committees with enough time for them to, if there's a concern, provide feedback about those committee compositions before the review process of resumes happens. So it sounds like we're starting to get right into the thick of that, and I'm sure that's probably on people's radar, and I know people have had more important things to do, but I did want to just drop that reminder. Anything else on the reports before we move on? Okay, next up we have budget. You want to set that up, Meredith? You want me to?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Three things really that I wanted to start with. First, at our last meeting, we mentioned the new flexibility around reserve funds, and I included in the board packet you received on Friday some information about that. And so, you know, basically what it allows for is previously there were only 2 areas that were allowed to have reserve funds under, and those were for capital projects and also capital equipment purchases. And what's changed now is that districts can establish reserve funds for any cost center. So under regular education, special education, transportation, maintenance, etc. And the other allowance that's new is that you don't have to have a district hold a district meeting in order to expend from those reserve funds if they're allowed in the initial budget where you approve your annual budget for the year. Then you can just have a public notice of a special meeting, special board meeting to expend those funds for emergency purposes. So, you know, this was obviously put into effect to give districts an option for putting funds into a reserve to be able to respond more quickly and really under legal frameworks for accessing unassigned funds in the event of an emergency. it's one option available to us, and we can talk a little bit more in the meeting about, or in this discussion about those other options. But did you have any questions on the reserve fund information I sent out?
I had one question. I admit I read this quickly earlier this afternoon, but if I'm reading it correctly, that even if we establish a reserve fund and we wanted to go spend out of that reserve, we would have to have it says a special meeting. Would that be is that a board meeting, or is that a public meeting with a vote of the community?
No, it's a special meeting that's not, it doesn't require a public vote
So it's a
of
special
community members, of voters.
Okay.
But you have to advertise and give public notice and hold a special board meeting
Okay.
where you act on pulling those funds from reserve. But, the caveat is that it does have to be for emergency purposes. You can't do it because you decide, well, we're going to use those now to, hire someone that we want to hire now. That's not an emergency. So
given that, it would seem to me to be that puts maybe more limits on that than we would like. I mean, that's just my take on it, and I could be wrong, and I could be convinced otherwise. But I was intrigued by this option when you brought it up to us last week. I guess I'm, based on my reading of it today and your comments right there, I guess I'm less intrigued now.
Go ahead, Brian.
I had the same impression. I think, first of all, you have to put it in a cost center, and you can't predict where the cost center emergency is going to happen. And in likelihood, it's, if we're planning for a scenario where they curtail the last payment from the state or something like that, it's going to be across all the cost centers. So that, and once you put in a reserve, you can't get it back to the general funds. So then you're sitting there, if you put money across all 11 cost centers, it's sitting there forever. You just have a lot more flexibility if you keep it in the contingency and use the carry forward. So it's effectively coming out of the undesignated fund, but by using it as carry forward and putting in the contingency, it's already voted on by the voters. So I just think that's a much more flexible tool, and that we'll get to that conversation shortly, but that's what I would recommend.
Any other questions about reserve?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so there's an undesignated, which is separate from these, correct?
Yes.
And for these, I think I just heard Brian say that there's no cross. If you put it in one of the 11 cost centers, there's no transferring. You can't spend it somewhere else.
Right. I think ultimately you can dissolve a reserve fund. We did that a couple years back with a special education one or a fuel one. I forget, one of those. And so, to do that though, it's not just a public vote. It's a process to dissolve a reserve fund. Lynn can jump in and add more information here because I'm out of my depth talking off the top of my head on this topic.
Can I just ask, when you say dissolve, what if you just want to spend some of it in another cost center? Is that not allowable?
Yeah, my understanding is that when you set it up, you have to set it up under the cost center that you would end up wanting to spend it for. So if you set it up for regular education, but you needed it in special education, that it couldn't be crossed over into another cost center. Really, there are limits similar to that if we put it in contingency in our regular budget. Typically we set up a regular education contingency and a special education contingency, but not in the other cost centers because typically they don't reach a threshold where we have as much of a concern about needing contingency. And in this case, we haven't really talked about that aspect and how we would spread if we went with an option of putting, say, a month subsidy into contingency in our budget, how we should spread that across cost centers and create new contingencies really that we've never done before.
I think we can transfer just by board vote up to 5% of a cost center.
Yeah, that would be the difference, Brian, is in a reserve, we can't do that because it's set up as a reserve. But with contingency, we could if we needed to. But like Meredith said, I think the best solution is to spread it out a little bit. But if we got into an emergency situation, we easily could do a board vote to do a transfer between cost centers. We typically do at the end of the year anyway. And back on Meredith's thing on the reserve, you can take out a reserve, but it is a special vote. It's usually a warrant article at our annual meeting. We did that with the special education reserve when we found out that wasn't the best way to do that. But it's a lot harder where in a contingency at the end of the year, if it's not used, it's automatically dumped back into undesignated.
You know, I frankly think that these new reserve capabilities are better if you have more in your unassigned fund than we have. You know, for districts who have, there are districts who have really large unassigned fund balances. And I think that would be maybe a scenario where I would consider the reserve option more than just what we were talking about with contingencies.
I would agree.
I guess in good times it would be great because it looks like it's in addition to the contingency, what is it? Contingency reserve, unallocated. I don't know which. I'm not sure if they're all the same thing here. Unallocated, but it looks like it's in addition to that. So in good times, that might be good for the big line, the big cost centers to have some of, have that there as well for emergency. But unfortunately, we're probably not in good times. So, but
another thing to think about is when we're talking about reserve, it would look different than our capital reserve that we have set up, because our capital reserve is outside of our budget, and these reserves, the way they have made them, are inside our budget. So it does look a little bit different than our capital improvement reserve that we currently have. Just another thing to keep in mind when you're thinking about the reserves and the contingencies, that these new ones do look a little bit different than what we're used to.
I mean, to my mind, the reserves are mostly for anticipated expenses that don't fit into 1 year's budget, right? You need to buy a new boiler or a new roof, so you put 100,000 in over 2 or 3 years, and you build it up until you have the money to spend. Because it does take a vote. It can be used a little bit for emergency, but normally it takes a vote of the entire town to take it out of the reserve. So that makes it a little less effective for the emergency fund. This district, we've always gone with the contingency funds for the emergency concept. So we've used the reserves more for saving towards large capital projects where we may want to contribute over multiple years to a large capital project.
So shifting to another topic under this, an update on the annual budget meeting. We haven't heard if there is a specific alternative that will be approved. I'm told that we expect that it might be wrapped up in some of the details that will come out this week with this new phase executive order. So in speaking with MSMA, they felt like we might know something by Thursday on this topic. So there has been work. There was a survey they sent out to all districts late last week about this to gather some information. So they've been working on it. It's just moving slower than I think they had initially anticipated and communicated to us. So we'll wait to hear what that looks like, but it's still pending. The other thing is we have the end of year projections. I shared that document earlier today. For those listening in, it's in the folder on the website, on the board website. So when you look at the documents entitled I don't know what the document's entitled because it looks different on my end, sorry.
April 28th budget details.
Yeah, budget details. So the top section of that page shows the FY20 year-end forecast. along with, you can see the last 3 fiscal years there. So much to our surprise, not really, but we didn't expect this year, but I think a lot's happened this year that we didn't expect that's contributed to this budget picture. Our projection is that we will not need our carry forward to for our budget this year. And that's really for 2 reasons. One is we had a significantly higher number of tuition students than we budgeted for. You know, we budget in a time where there's not a lot of certainty around tuition students, and the nature of really, especially 8th grade into 9th grade students, is that there's a lot of maybe delaying of a decision and maybe changing of minds that happen. And so we really didn't have these numbers until summer. And so when we have to budget, we try to be, you know, base it on as much as known at the time, but we try to be conservative so we don't overstate our revenue. So this year, that really, you know, helped our revenue picture substantially. You see there that we're projecting 188,000 and some change revenue overage. The additional tuition students was actually higher than that amount because this was offset some by lower international student tuition than we budgeted for last year. So there was significantly higher, you know, local tuition students. And the other factor that's causing us to not use our unassigned this year is frankly, you know, our current situation. We're not spending as much as we typically do. There are a number of factors that really are a number of areas where we're not having the opportunity really to expend, like substitutes have gone down significantly given our current situation. Sorry, I'm looking for my list, but I'll talk off the top of my head. Also, facility rental. We had a lot of facility rental expenditures planned for the spring. International students, when those students went home early, you know, all the housing and food costs and other costs that we had planned for them this spring. There were a couple of others on my list, but they don't come to mind. But there are a number of expenditures that we're just not able to spend the way. Professional development. We had a number of professional development, you know, people plan to go places, and even more that were not in the queue already with purchase orders and registrations, but were planned for the spring that we're not able to do now. So we've gotten a number of refunds back on things we'd already paid for that aren't able to happen. So a lot of under expending because of our current situation. And when Lynn and I talked about it, we estimate that to be, Lynn hates the estimating part of this, but I'm going to say 150,000 because it's probably conservatively 100, but I think it could go as high as 200, just depending on how many of those things you pull into that calculation. So, you know, when you look at those things together, if those things had not happened unexpectedly, we really would have used up some of that 816,000 that was in our budget. But if ever there's a year where we're glad we're not using it, I think it's this one, because it strengthens our financial position heading into uncertain times more than we might have otherwise. So you see the net change in fund balance that we're projecting is 29,405 to be added into the fund balance. But also reminder that we've taken 126,000 out of unassigned into the capital improvement reserve. So the net projected change to unassigned is that negative 96,594. So you can see what our projected new unassigned fund balance would be at the end of this fiscal year, just above $2 million.
Before adding anything into this budget.
Yes, which we have carried forward the 816,000 figure to balance our FY21 budget again. So that's, I think that's an important figure for us to know and consider as we look at, number one, our FY21 budget expenditures and plans around if we need to make adjustments there, and also around planning for potential curtailment or reduction in funds. I shared with you the article that was in yesterday's Portland Press Herald. You know, there are several sources of information. Brian and Lynn attended a town council meeting last night where they were talking about the same topic of just forecasting, trying to forecast what to expect budgetarily next year. I think right now everyone, no, not everyone, I think most feel that this fiscal year that there are enough reserves in place in the state that we will be able to get through June without curtailment. Certainly most of the individuals in the Portland Press article felt that way, and I felt like their rationale for that was sound, and I think that was echoed last night at the town council meeting, that same message. I think, you know, when we look at next fiscal year, it's, you know, really clear that it's going to look different economically, and that's going to impact all sectors. And, you know, we're a large portion of the state budget, education is. And so I think we will without a doubt be impacted by reductions in, you know, state budget, state funds available next year. I think on the local level, what Brian and Lynn shared with me after last night's town council meeting is, you know, it's up in the air for the town, but they're feeling, you know, I would say relatively optimistic of not anticipating a substantial drop in any local funds, but they are seeing a downturn in some local collections right now. And it just depends on what happens with, you know, things opening back up as to whether or not some of those will rebound. And I will let Brian and Lynn speak a little bit more to that. They attended the meeting.
Yeah, like you said, town is actually losing a little bit of revenue out of this fiscal year, but they think it's manageable. I don't think the school district is going to lose any revenue this year. Next year, it's just a giant guessing game. You know, probably the biggest question on the table is whether the state aid, general aid to the towns and state subsidy to us is going to change or not. And, you know, quite honestly, most of that's actually, I think, the biggest piece of that's playing out on the federal stage, whether you've probably been reading in the news, there's a debate among leaders about whether to do what they did last time in 2009, which was the federal government gave subsidies to the states to in turn give subsidies to schools and towns and various other functions, and to keep the state budgets more whole. I will phrase it this way, more whole than they would have been otherwise, because they certainly had hits, but it mostly ended up in more discretionary areas around the environment and roads and some other things like that. Some of the core things like schools didn't get hit. So that's still up in the air. We may know more about that in a few weeks, or we may not. As of this moment, there was not a belief that property values were going to fall drastically, or that, at least this is what I heard. I don't want to put words in anybody from the town's mouth, but or the collections, there is no sign at the moment the collections are falling through the floor either. The big collection was before this started, but collections are proceeding apace, and there's not a lot of turnover in houses right now because nobody's out shopping, but I didn't hear that there were signs of dropping property prices. So the local property tax as a revenue source is going to remain stable, but the caveat I heard there was if the university doesn't open and the students don't return, some of the big rental properties may not have students in them, and that could affect their valuation. But that's one piece of the puzzle. I mean, the other piece though, so that's the town picture. The other piece, of course, is we still at some point are going to have the town vote on our budget. So you can call it optics or politics or whatever you want to call it. But in the end, we do have to get the town voting on our budget. So I think, one piece of this, we have to make sure the revenues are actually going to come. And, the worry that there might be a curtailment is going to be something we're going to talk about. But even if we were guaranteed of the revenue, we still have to get the town to vote on our budget. So I think we, in this town, very grateful to the public. They support our schools. That's usually not a huge question hanging over our budgets. But I think like everything else this year, that's going to be a different scenario. So we have to make sure that our budget is a palatable budget that can actually pass the voters of this town this year too. So that's another consideration that comes in. Those were some of the things that I thought and heard. I don't know, anything you would add, Lynn? You're muted if you're talking. There you go.
Nope, I heard the exact same things that you heard at the town meeting last night. I took them the same way. And yeah, I agree with everything that you have said.
So a lot of uncertainty, but at least you have all the information that is available at hand as far as we know.
So the other thing on the budget details document, I just reminded you again of the amount of monthly subsidy expected next year. Just over 400,000. And then also Brian and I decided just to, bring back so you can see again the reductions that we've made to date. And also, the items that we had on kind of a tier 2 listing for reduction ideas. There are a few other things that have come up. We haven't added those to these, like the dental insurance, I think I might have mentioned, came in and it's a roughly $3,000 savings. So there's a slight reduction there. We typically get that information so late that we don't change it in the budget. But we certainly have the opportunity to do that now since we're on hold with the budget approval. So, I think we clearly have some time to wait until we know more about when or what the process is going to look like for annual budget meeting kind of alternatives. With a July 14th referendum, if we were given an alternative that we could meet that requirement and move forward with the July 14th referendum, we would need to sign warrants by the end of May. We have a late May meeting. We could do it then, or we could call a special meeting kind of right at the end of May. So we have some time. I feel like we need to have a strategy though. We need to know what our plan is going to be. I don't think we have to figure that out tonight because as time goes on, more is known. And so if we can have some general ideas about the direction we want to go with that subject to change as more becomes known, I think that would be helpful.
I guess that's where my question, I guess, and maybe it's for all, I guess it's for all of us, but what is this? What do we think this means? Because thanks for including the Portland Press Herald stuff in there. Some other indicators that I've been seeing are Department of Labor said that 100,000 people filed for unemployment, and that's about a 15% of our workforce, which in 2008, I think we saw maybe 5 or 6%. So it's significantly higher, obviously. And also I've heard the governor had warned, and that was kind of in those Portland Press Herald somewhat, I think as well, that this is going to be the lowest revenue for the state probably in 30 years. I didn't go back and look what the revenue was 30 years ago, but I'm sure it was a fraction. So what do we do at this point? Because I think the budget has been formed. The budget was formed pre-COVID, I think, right, for the most part.
Yeah.
So my question to us all, I guess, is what does it mean? What do we do at this point? Because I don't think between now and the end of May we're going to see. I mean, the stay-at-home orders were just pushed to the end of May. Slowly, people are getting back to work, but we have to assume that a lot of people going back to work are not having jobs just yet. I guess we don't need to decide anything now, but generally, what is it? Because I think it's going to be draconian, honestly, unfortunately, and I think we need to be tuned into that and thinking about what it means to us. Just curious if others have thoughts.
I like Meredith's idea of, we should have a plan in place, but we should also wait it out as long as we can so we have a clearer picture of what's going on. But at the same time, having a plan in place so that, when we get to that later hour, we can move quickly.
Yeah, and I think the one big piece of I kind of already said this, but the one big piece of information that we don't have that we maybe could have a better read over the next month is whether the federal government is going to subsidize state governments or not. If they don't, and the state is having to run just purely on the revenues that they raise, that's obviously a very extreme scenario. That's the scenario you're talking about, Leo. But if they do subsidize the state governments, it's not going to be a no pain scenario still, but it's a much less painful scenario. And the talks on that are speeding up at Capitol Hill. Even just today, I saw some key indications that a compromise was starting to converge. So I do think we should kind of not take any big decisions until it's no guarantee that they have to solve it by the time we have to finish our budgets. But I definitely would not feel comfortable going into a slashing mode before we hear about that. I think the main thing that I would like to do is that, the Meredith Penquist group talks to superintendents, some of whom have been superintendent for 20 years in the state. And kind of the worst case scenario you're hearing is that the legislature, even if they're in pain, typically does try and prioritize education. And partly because education is important, partly because they know that it translates very directly into jobs. But the worst case scenario that you hear the seasoned veterans of superintendents talk about is that the last state subsidy, the last 12 checks come from the state. The last state check just got canceled as a matter of curtailment because the revenues weren't there. So that was the worst case scenario. And I think it'd be remiss of us not to plan for that. Meredith has that number on the bottom of that sheet. It's about $400,000. State subsidy is not a majority. Whatever the politics in the state about funding 55% is, it's not a majority of our revenue sources. Most of it comes from local taxes and tuition. So I think we should plan for that scenario of a 1 month curtailment of about 400,000. And I would argue that the main way to plan for that is to put another 400,000 into contingency. And because if you look at that spreadsheet Meredith gave, our undesignated fund has been going up and up and up every year for the last 5 years. I'm in a place where I'd rather not spend our undesignated fund, but in a worst case scenario, I could, when I came on the board, it was at 1.4 million and it's at 2 million right now. So I would be okay with putting 400,000 out of the undesignated fund, basically adding it to the carry forward to match then on the expense side a contingency another 400.
You are pausing, Brian.
Centers. Oh, internet problem.
We lost you at what you said about the expenditure side.
So on the expenditure side, I would put the 400,000 in contingency, right? So 400,000 in revenue by upping the carry forward, which means worst case scenario, if we have a curtailment, it comes out of our undesignated fund. And then we match that on the expense side with 400,000 of contingency. So, best case scenario, we don't have to use it and it just passes back out through the carry forward in the undesignated fund next year. Worst case scenario, the state curtails a month of our subsidy, and we have an authorization from the voters to spend it. And next year, our undesignated fund is at 1.6 million instead of 2 million. So that's we really haven't discussed that. We just kind of copied last year's carry forward because it seemed to be on target. But that would be the scenario. That's the piece of planning I think we should just go ahead and commit to now. Or, that's my recommendation, is that's what we should do. And I don't know that we need to wait for that, because that's really planning for, and I think, having some plan in place for that, where if the state does drop a month of payments, we have a plan. That would be my recommendation for a plan.
Just
The
to
rest
be
of the stuff, I'd like to use the 3 or 4 weeks. Go ahead.
just to be clear, you are talking about for next year's budget, correct?
Next year's budget. In my mind,
All right.
this year's
Gotcha.
budgets, we're not really at risk this year.
Right.
The state's playing some fiscal games, but nobody thinks we're going to get a cut this year. So I'm talking about next year.
I wasn't sure where you were talking about that number that's on this year's thing, so I just wanted to make sure that I was clear on that.
Yeah. No, I mean, worst cases can always be imagined, but the scenario I would plan for is we don't get a state subsidy in June of 2021. And that's about $400,000. So I would like to know how we can make up $400,000 gap. And I would recommend, again, I'm just recommending that we do it through the carry forward in the undesignated.
Yeah, I think that I'm feeling less optimistic.
Fund.
Sorry.
If that scenario doesn't materialize.
Brian, you're breaking up a lot.
Go ahead.
Hey, Reg, can we work on getting
Okay.
Brian McGill some
Go ahead.
internet access?
I think I got too many kids streaming movies right now.
Yeah. So I guess what I was saying is I'm feeling concerned that, when I hear from colleagues that they lost a month of subsidy in a time that is being described as much less significant than the time we're in now, that, the impact will likely be greater than it has been in the past. And I do think historically, if you look back at our expenditure patterns over the course of the year, we do end with some of that carry forward, most of that carry forward unused. So I think that in a typical year gives us a little more flexibility as well. I think personally, I would like to see some expenditure reduction in conjunction with adding to our contingency to maybe have, a combined approach on that. I think the hard decision on that is you don't want to have an overreaction in this situation. But I think giving some consideration to what seems to be the right amount given the circumstance we're in. And I think that's the harder question to answer for me. But I think it's something that I'm interested in trying to figure out, because I think that's also part of selling the budget in these circumstances to our voters, really trying to work hard on reducing expenditures as much as possible.
Yep, that makes sense. I mean, I think the other piece of this is Leo already quoted the job loss statistics. I just think we need to be very sensitive to the fact that Orono, I'm sure, already has a healthy number of people who are unemployed.
You're freezing.
And, all across the country, a lot of people I know.
Brian, I think you're either going to have to kill the video or maybe find another
lot of people.
spot.
Okay, let me kill video. Yep, that's a good suggestion. A lot of the people I know across the country right now are taking furloughs, which are basically pay cuts, so unemployed or pay cuts. So I think we need to be keenly aware of the optics of where many of our taxpayers and voters are when we present them the budget for next year. It's a different question than what our actual revenue picture is. And I mean, I share your concern, Meredith, that it could be worse, and that I think we have to do our good work on the cutting expenses too, but it's almost impossible to project at this point what that scenario is. And I would hate to overshoot. I'd rather have plan A, plan B, and plan C for what we do as things get worse.
Yeah, I think that's kind of where I am too, and I think I agree with everything that's been said so far. I do think that we need to plan for a reduction in state funds that's bigger than what happened last time, given the economic carnage is going to be worse now than happened the last time funds were pulled. That being said, I do think we're going to have an answer, I think, from the federal level as to what's coming, if anything, certainly within a month. Maybe there won't be a vote in a month, but I think there'll be clarity within a month. Maybe with some uncertainty around the edges, but I think clarity at least on whether or not something's coming. And even the movement you've seen in the last 36 to 48 hours on that, the picture has changed dramatically just in that period of time. And so I think we have a little bit of time to work with on that front, and I think we should use it. So I guess I like the idea of multiple different options on the table. I think that I do, and I agree with Brian. I think the option right now, an easy one for us and a minimal, plan A, if you will, to commit to is we're going to take that 1 month's worth of subsidy out of undesignated and have that available for us if we need to use it. I think that's a good move on plan A. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't commit to doing that now, even though we don't have to formally commit to it. We could say, okay, we're going to start there. And that gives, and then look at what plan B would be. And that could be a combination of Meredith working with her admin team to look at what some of these cuts to expenditures might look like. I'd want to hear their recommendations on that before we started making recommendations. Obviously, they're the ones that are in better position to at least present us the options and to rank them for us. So I'd want to see, that gives them some time to work on that. That also buys us, gets us some greater clarity at the federal level, and then they come back, Meredith and her team come back with, okay, here's some possible cuts in expenditures. Here's how we roughly rank them. That's what the amount is. We look at what that might look like in addition to the 1 month of subsidy we already set aside, and then we can figure out, well, what do we think about these cuts? Some we might like more than others, and then add what we come up with, if necessary, to the roughly $400,000 we've already set aside. And then we think to ourselves, okay, well, what is the number that we should set aside? And we've got carry forward, we've got cuts to expenditure. Do we want to go back for more cuts to expenditure? Do we want to take more out of carry forward? What do we want to do? And that might look like plan C. But I think at this point, I'd be comfortable with, we're going to take that money out of undesignated for 1 month worth of subsidy. We're going to commit to that, and then ask Meredith and her team to go back and, okay, come with us with some expenditure cuts, whether that's looking at these tier 2 possible reductions we've already seen, whether there be more there, I don't know, but that would give them some time, not a ton of time, but a little bit of time to come to us with something, and then we could go from there. So I guess that's where I am at this point.
I think
Their feedback from the board. Go ahead, Leo.
I was just going to say, I think I agree. That seems like a sort of a no-brainer that no harm, and we should do that as far as moving those and undesignated to cover a month. But I agree with what Meredith was saying too. I don't think that's going to be the extent of it at this point. So I do think looking at expense reduction is pretty important. And just to kind of put on the table also, I agree that the administration is going to come back, but I think new hires are always hiring freeze is a pretty standard practice. I think when when you're in this type of scenario. So I think that's something that should be considered seriously. But obviously, I think, well, maybe it's not obvious, but I feel like we want to save what we have. So looking first at potential new hire, new positions are where they start in my mind. But again, like Mark said, that's obviously for the team to come back with. I guess that was it.
Yeah, I think we can work on generating more ideas, and would certainly welcome input from staff. We have a lot of staff on the call tonight, a lot of people here. So if people have ideas, please do send them to your administrator or to me. A hiring freeze is difficult for some positions that, but we'll look at it and talk about it. Certainly if it's a new position, it's something, those are the ones actually on our tier 2 list. Some of them on that list are the new positions. There's one that's not there. But the jobs we're advertising now are, it's a little difficult for me to imagine how we can't hire most of those people for those positions, but we'll look at it, because we'll look at everything. And those hiring decisions are, far enough out now that we can have this conversation kind of looking at all aspects.
I guess I would add that if it's replacing existing, that in my mind isn't new hire, for whatever that's worth. I don't know, because I know we've lost some, especially English at the high school, and I assume those I don't look at as new hires. Those are new people filling old existing positions. Is that?
Thanks for clarifying, because yeah, we have everything we have posted now, with one exception, is replacing a position that was just vacated for someone from an existing employee. So the new positions are listed on the tier 2, and there's one that's not, that is the classroom teacher, the first grade teacher at ASA is the new position, and the 5th grade teacher. Kind of both of those are new positions this year, but they're, the 5th grade teacher was planned with an enrollment bubble that's been moving up, but there hasn't been anyone in that position for 2 years. But I think to pull back on that at this time is, I would have a hard time imagining that working. The first grade position, I mean, we can certainly talk about it. We're not advertising for that as such, because we did internal shifting. But the 5th grade position being advertised is a part of that whole picture.
I mean, I guess in the hires, I would go, we were already distinguished. Still bad internet.
You're still breaking up, Brian.
Sorry. On the hires, I would distinguish replacement, new positions, and positions that can be funded by extra money, right? Because we do have this CARES money.
Right.
Which is intended to address educational issues, and there are going to be substantial educational deficits, no matter how well we've done and how well we do. So I think all three, if there's federal money to hire our operating budget hires, and in there, I think replacements versus new is important.
Yes. Yeah, the CARES money is the one bucket of money we know about right now. And we were thinking about using CARES money in a combination of ways, some of which is on the tier 2 list. So in the end, that ends up, as a savings in the expenditure part of our RSU 26 budget.
Do we know what that money is already? Have they already?
Yep. It's 93. We think it's, we have some general information. They haven't received this, or the specifics haven't come out yet, but they've told us it will be approximately 80% of our Title I allocation from last year. So that equates to around 93,000. And it can be used under any federal program purpose that exists, like IDEA, the Special Education Federal Fund, Title I for helping at-risk academically at-risk students, Title II professional development, Title III or Title IV for there are 3 different uses of Title IV. So a lot of different buckets that you can consider that under, but it does have restrictions. Like we can't say, well, we have a $93,000 shortfall. We want to plug that into our revenue and help it fund our balance our budget. We can't use it like that. It has to have a specific purpose under a federal program. So some of the areas that we've talked about are something under special education, potentially the core ed tech could be considered under that, part of the curriculum coordinator potentially under that fund. So those are some things we've been talking about.
Is the CARE money one time?
Right now, it appears to be a one-time fund, but we don't know the future.
All right, thanks.
I guess in the higher sense, we know where we're ending up and it's not committing us, but we know we are.
You're breaking up, Brian.
Good candidates. I would err on the side of advertising positions. I was just trying to say.
We still can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm gonna try phone.
Len, do you have anything you want to add while we're waiting on Brian to come back?
I don't think so. Not right now.
Just maybe one question. I know I ask this every time, and I'm pushing for information we don't have yet, but maybe for Reg and for Lynn, have we gotten any greater clarity yet on high school tuition numbers, or is that still just as murky as it was last time?
Nothing that would change that number that we budgeted.
Okay, great.
So,
thank you.
In either direction, so.
Okay, thanks.
I had a question also on just maybe for Lynn or Meredith. I don't know. Are we expecting an ED 279, a revised one? Have they given us a final one? What's the expectation there?
They haven't said that we're getting a new one. In fact, they said, I don't know, 4 weeks ago or so that what we have is likely what we'll just have. So we're not told that we're going to get a revised one. I guess the only way we would get a revision is sometime, early fall after more forecasting has been done, that we might get, told then what an adjustment might look like. Yeah.
At that point, it's a curtailment if
Right.
it's anything lower, right? Obviously.
Yeah,
so
we're not going to get an adjustment in time to impact our budget planning process.
We're not. We don't anticipate that. Okay, I was just. Okay.
Yeah.
Too bad.
As helpful as that would be, right?
Yeah, that's minor detail.
Yeah, so this page, the preliminary budget worksheet, which it hasn't changed really since our, I think when we met on March 7th or 8th, whatever that date was. No, April 7th or 8th is the last time that changed. So our total increase right now is at $750,769. So I think, if I had a goal, it would be that we would have an increase that had a 6 in the front of it. I would like to have a low 6 in the front of it. But that's just a personal kind of what I've been thinking, but I mean, sure, I'd love to be lower than that, but I just don't, at this point, it seems like we don't know enough to try to go deeper than that.
Can you remind us how much of that increase is due to the bond? It's more than the increase, right? The bond portion's more than the increase.
Yeah, like 900 and do I have that paper? Like, I want to say 919,000. Len, do you remember that number?
Yep.
Is that a yes, that's
yes,
right? Or
yes,
you
that's
have it?
correct. Yes,
Okay.
that's correct.
So we made the
900
reductions. Sorry.
919 is the bond payment you said for next year?
Well,
Yeah,
it's
so
the total
if
impact of the bond, yeah.
right,
On the budget.
so if not for the bond, we would actually be reducing the budget as it currently
by 2.5 or something approximately.
Yes.
250. Yeah.
Well, whatever the difference between 750 and 919 is.
Okay, somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
so we reduced, tier 1, you see where we've made some reductions in the budget expenditures already, about 700 or 397,000. So that's why we were able to go, below that anticipated bond increase amount.
Am I back in the meeting?
You're back.
Okay. I heard most of that. The only thing I was trying to say when I was breaking up is that as far as the hires, because it's not committing us, wouldn't want to do anything that commits us right now because picture's bleak as we're talking about, but we're also losing good candidates. So I would err on the side of advertising positions right now. Still leaving the decision about whether to actually hire to further down the road.
So which ones are you thinking, Brian?
Well, the ed tech ones don't seem as urgent, but the curriculum coordinator does seem, we may well not end up filling that, but if, for example, the CARES money or something lets us fill that, I think that's an urgent one to advertise.
Yeah, that's one, if we're going to hire it, we really need to have that person in place by midsummer, because there is going to be a lot of work that we're going to be doing around curriculum and instructional planning for starting back in the fall. And, it's one of the reasons that I think it's a strong possibility to use some CARES money for that, because there's an even greater need for that kind of leadership and dedicated leadership in our district to really help, help us plan for our response when students return.
Any other board members have a thought about advertising or just not doing anything?
Do we know when, or roughly, we'd be able to get clarity on what exactly we can use that CARES monies for versus what we can't use it for?
I'm told that Allison Woodard's on the call. So Allison, if you have more information I'm about to say, feel free to chime in. The state applications were released last week from the federal government, and we were told by the state that they would be acting very quickly on that. So I anticipate by mid-May we'll have more clarity. I mean, we've already been given some general guidelines, but there will be more that comes out.
I guess in that case, I think it doesn't hurt to advertise for the position. It doesn't commit us to actually filling the position just for advertising it. So I think it probably doesn't hurt to go ahead with the advertising, post it at, and see what we get. And by then, hopefully, we'll have clarity on what we can use that CARES money for. Maybe we'll have a better idea of what's coming at the federal level. So I don't see any harm in posting it. I would not want to be seen as fully committed to actually filling that position at this point. I do think I agree with as much as I hate to say it. I mean, for years I was kind of the person who was probably least convinced of the need for this position. And now I've done pretty much a 180 on it, and I'm very enthusiastic about finally doing it. But if we get to a worst case scenario, then maybe it gets pushed back a year.
Just to weigh in, I think there's an echo. I think if the CARES money can be used towards that, and given what we're doing here, and all you guys talked about, everyone talked about at the last meeting, my first one, I think getting caught up is going to be a monumental task and require lots of coordination, and that's obviously a whole district-wide impact there on every grade level. So if CARES money can be used towards that, then I would concur that that's a good advertisement. And again, not necessarily committing, but that will impact it, I think. So makes sense to advertise that one.
Another possibility for off that tier 2 list to possibly advertise is the, pardon me while I try and find that of the multiple windows I have open, but we've got the ed tech at core, and I know that Reg had talked about the possibility that might, not that this would be the reason we do it, but that might actually not only be revenue neutral, but might might be a revenue generator, because there's maybe more interest in that program, especially from tuition students, that we've been able to satisfy. So that might be something else. Again, it's hard to say for sure whether that's true or not. Obviously, we wouldn't know that. But I think it's a good position to fill. And two, it would be easier, obviously, to go ahead with that, even under the current circumstances, if we knew that it was going to be revenue neutral or maybe even a small net positive. So that might be something else to think about. I don't know if Reg or Meredith, either of you want to jump in on that, or Lynn, whoever, if anybody has additional thoughts or information on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to know if it's going to be a revenue generator. I think there's certainly potential there that we might attract a student, but I don't think that should be the reason we would do it, because it's so unknown as to whether it would be that. But I think, in my mind, expanding the enrollment capacity at core is more important than ever, given the impact that this time may have had on students who are already at risk. So I think for that reason, I think it's an even higher priority than it was pre-COVID-19.
Sounds like there's a consensus to go ahead and advertise. We're just, like everything else, we're kind of on hold for a month as things develop, but I just hate to lose good candidates on the off chance, and it may be a small chance, but on the off chance that we get to go ahead, I'd hate to lose good candidates.
Yeah, I'm not sure we would advertise for the core ed tech right now, though. I think sometimes with ed tech advertisements, timing is different than when you want to do it for administrative or teaching position. So I'll talk with Reg a little bit about that and Sharon to determine, their thoughts on best timing for that.
Did you have more on budget, Meredith, or did anybody else?
I do not.
Mostly this thing's just so fast developing. We need to get as much information as we can, except we do know it's going to be bad. I guess that's we know the direction. We just don't know how much yet. So next up is COVID. Do you want to start this off on that, Meredith?
Sure. Yeah, so we've heard a lot tonight through principal reports about what's happening across the district. I think that, the current biggest question is how long we're going to remain in, under remote learning this school year. And I think that, we've had some internal conversations about this, and, I have a meeting later this week with the Pinquist Superintendent's Group where we're going to take up this topic and see if there's any regional consensus on recommendations around that. I think that there are some good reasons to consider moving up the end of the school year to an earlier date. I also think there are some, cons to that as well. I know, the having school in session provides a structure for students during this time that, while last week was probably a much needed week off, I think also, I saw the impact of unstructured time during this situation when parents still having to work. It's real. It's difficult for kids. But I think, in my mind, still the pros of potentially ending the school year slightly earlier is maybe outweighing not doing that. But I plan on bringing back some information to next week's meeting, following hopefully a good, fruitful discussion at our Pinquist meeting this week. Our internal conversations, I think we have talked about what that might look like internally and what that would accomplish. And, we'll need to obviously bring that to the board if we want to recommend that, because it would cause a change to the calendar for the school year. I think just for matter of the public to hear kind of the thinking around why that might be considered. I think two primary reasons. One is around kind of the point of diminishing returns in some ways, around how far we think productive instruction and moving students learning forward can go under this framework with the kind of external conditions layered on top of this. And I think secondly, as we think about needing to prepare for next school year that's going to look very different regardless of how we start back to school next year, we're going to need to have time with staff to be able to prepare for that. And so finishing a school year potentially earlier than planned gives us some time with staff, potentially now and potentially later when more is known in the summer. So those are the primary two reasons that we are interested in considering this and talking with the Pinquist region about this. But regardless of what happens at the Pinquist region, if it's right for Orono, I think we need to talk about it. But I would like to kind of try to work with our region if we can. We have on some other decisions through this time, and I think it's been fruitful and productive. And so I'd like to bring back some information after my meeting this week. So I don't know if you have any other questions on any of our COVID-19 response, we handled a lot of that during principal reports, or if anyone has any questions about the calendar issue I just mentioned. Uncharacteristically quiet after a long, robust budget discussion.
Yeah, like you said, we did go through a lot of that in the principal reports. And the last 4 meetings, it seems like it's been the main topic of conversation. So unless I see a board member unmuting, which I don't, I think we should just go ahead. So committee reports, policy subcommittees meeting a week from Thursday. Policy GCF, which is hiring, which may or may not be quite as high a priority as it was. Well, as you heard, there's some replacements that I think we're going to try and go ahead with. So we just wanted to do a touch up on that policy since it was put in place about 3 years ago. Meredith and I have been strategizing about all of the law changes which need to turn into policy changes. So
that's probably the main thing remaining on the agenda, although it did occur to me after Meredith and I talked that we do also have this class size discussion on whether that turns into a policy at this point in time or not. Really we're looking at kind of wrapping up the year. Those are really the main topics left for the policy subcommittee. Anything that I missed on that, Meredith?
No, I don't think so.
UTC, probably no meeting.
No, but
Nothing.
Meredith, you said you were going there. Did you find anything? I haven't heard anything.
Nothing of note. No, there was really no significant change. They were kind of in a holding pattern with budget as well, waiting to see what was going to happen with town, processes. So no.
Curriculum subcommittee hasn't met since the last report. Facilities building committee. Probably the biggest news is the drawings were finalized. It went out to bid last week. And sometime mid to late May, we will be opening bids and we'll have a much clearer picture of where we stand at that point in time. So we're in a little bit of a wait mode until those bids come back. So far, we've had a number that were pre-qualified and a number that have expressed interest. So far so good, but mostly we're just waiting.
Hey, Brian, did that bid go out as one for the fields and the building? Or
yes, it's one package.
It is.
Yeah, there just was too much interaction in terms of sharing driveways and sharing parking lots for setup and things. We thought we'd get a better deal to go with one general contractor. That's how we were advised, and it made sense to me anyway.
I know we talked a little bit a while ago about how we are not sure how this whole COVID situation will affect the bids in regards to maybe higher than expected for materials, depending on what's going on. Do we have any clearer idea on that? Or, I mean, are there contractors who are looking for work more than otherwise at this point, and therefore the bids would reflect that? Or do we have an idea of that?
I mean, it's still a big uncertain world. But I think the current best guess from our architects is we're more likely to end on the side of a lot of public projects, not public, private projects have been canceled and could end up helping us. But that's just a guess.
Yeah, I think it's just speculation at this point, and there's not a lot of data to really help make a kind of a better forecast than that. But I think the number of pre-qualified contractors was encouraging. So, I don't think they feel like there's any major signs that things are going to be negatively impacted for us at this point.
I know that we'll probably discuss this at the next building committee meeting whenever it happens, but I'm just wondering if Brian or Meredith, you've heard anything additional about how contractors would get access to the facility as they prepare their bids. I know there'd been some talk about maybe they come in on a Friday afternoon on one at a time, or there was some talk about maybe a virtual tour. I don't know if there's been any further discussion of that.
Yeah, there has.
Go ahead.
There has been discussion, and the way it was structured in the advertised bid that went out was that it would be a virtual walkthrough. We may be able to consider something different given the kind of today's change with the governor's order. It seems to give a little more flexibility of groupings of 10 or less. And so, I think that'll be a topic for discussion when we meet with Robin and CHA tomorrow morning. tomorrow morning, we were supposed to meet with Robin to plan for the virtual walkthrough that we were going to film for next week. But, you know, we would prefer to have an actual walkthrough if we think that's something that's safe to do. Just so that, you know, I think Reg pointed out at a building committee meeting how important, you know, it is for contractors to be able to, you know, look around and not be able to say later that there was something that they weren't able to see on the walkthrough that's caused a change of condition and therefore a change of price. So if that's possible, you know, I think we would want to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. And I do think that the governor's announcement today makes this a more likely option than it was before. And depending on how many people actually want to submit bids, you could more easily see doing it in one or two groups now than you could before, and doing it safely. So I think it's certainly more encouraging that we might be able to do that now.
The one thing that a lawyer said is the key is that you have to treat everybody equally. So I think splitting it into two groups could potentially be problematic, but if we can fit it into one group, that might be possible.
Well, I mean, if did we have more than, do we know, how many pre-qualified bidders do we have?
7.
7 pre-qualified.
So I think that's
Might be possible.
Yeah, it might be doable, right?
Yep.
And if you have a standard kind of walkthrough, wouldn't that be treated equally? Or are you talking about timing? I mean, if you do it an hour, stagger them an hour or something like that, I definitely agree that for all the reasons, obviously, it'd be nice to have them on site versus a virtual, because that inevitably would probably come back and bite us.
I think the issue is if you bring them in separately and somebody looks at something and asks a question, they have information that the other people don't have. There's a pretty heavy legal requirement of common information. I mean, you know, obviously what they don't want you to do is to bring in a bunch of different contractors and start feeding information to your favorite contractor, which is not what we're considering. But to avoid that, there's a pretty heavy burden on making sure everybody has exactly the same information. But if we're at 7 and we can do up to 10,
yeah.
And, you know, it's Brent and the architect and Meredith, that's 10. So.
Yep. And we have a building committee meeting we're trying to schedule right now for the next week or so.
Okay. Wellness subcommittee, I imagine hasn't met? No.
We haven't met.
Is there any other business? Any requests for future agenda items? Any public comment? Going, gone. All right. Next meeting will be Tuesday, May 5th, so a week from today. Regular meeting, 6 p.m. and the Zoom link will be posted later tonight or first thing tomorrow morning. Any requests for information or follow?
Sorry, we were talking last
Go ahead.
meeting about whether or not we were going to meet next time, and we want to go ahead with that meeting on the 5th.
Unusual times, 3 in a row. So, but they are unusual times. Yep. Next Tuesday, any requests for information or follow-up from a board member?
I was just going to request, you know, and maybe not necessarily Portsmouth Press Herald stuff, but I mean, that's good too. But it would be nice to be hearing whatever we're hearing, whatever you're hearing, Meredith, whatever they're putting out for us. Because stuff is developing so fast, it'd be nice to be hearing that stuff as it's coming. And I guess that's probably what you do if you feel it should be shared, but maybe leaning a little more so that way with all the uncertainty.
Okay, sure. I mean, we haven't gotten a lot of information.
No.
No, I mean,
newspapers
really,
are our primary source.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
Not. All right, yeah, I guess
Yeah.
any sort of state announcements, especially around funding, would be great to kind of
Yeah.
get real time if they do them, but I guess they're probably not gonna, but.
Yeah, they're forming a committee that will be working on less about funding from what I remember in the memo that came out today, and more about potentially how we might start a new school year. So that was out today.
I think the other thing, Leo, that you're going to see is and some states are already doing this. I don't know if Maine will or not, but I do think you're going to start to see an increasing number of states actually put dollar figures on the shortfall that they're going to be facing as a result of this. Just to throw into the debate that's going on at the federal level, right? I mean, there's been all this back and forth between the various power centers in Washington, and I think a lot of state governors now are recognizing that this isn't a done deal, and you're gonna start to see. You've already seen some states do it, putting numbers on. Okay, this is what we're facing as a shortfall, and so if nothing is done, this is how much we're going to have to cut. So I think we're going to see some numbers like that come out probably at the state level. And those are important numbers, but I think it's also important to remember that those are being put out. Not that they're cooked or anything, but they're being put out to influence the debate that's going on. So I mean, those will come out, I think, but just because that number comes out doesn't mean that that's what the shortfall is going to be.
Gotcha. Good point.
Frame the larger debate.
Yeah, to basically lobby the Fed.
Lobby or pressure, yeah.
I just got a chat comment that the DOE sends out a weekly update. I know both Meredith and I already get that too. Most of the financial stuff really ultimately comes from the governor and the legislature, but we're certainly tracking everything that's out there. And anybody who wants to subscribe to the DOE updates can do that too. I think we're now ready to go into executive session. So while we're working that through, the vote, people can start to drop off. We will not take another vote in public except for adjournment. So not take another vote period except for adjournment. So thank you everybody for attending, and go ahead and drop off. So I would make a motion to go into executive session under 1 MRSA 405-6F, discussion of a confidential record, emergency response plan. Is there a second?
I second.
We do
Any
want to keep the
discussion?
administrators. We do want to keep the administrators for this, right, Brian?
It's up to Meredith, but that's what we've usually done.
Yep.
I just
Yep.
wanted to make sure that they knew we wanted them for this one.
Yeah. Yep. Go ahead and take a vote. Aaron?
Aye.
Leo?
Leo seems to have stepped out on this video,
Leo.
so let's skip him for the moment and buy him some time.
Yep. Jake?
Aye.
How do you vote?
Aye.
Mark, how do you vote?
Well, I'm thinking about my vote here and looking at my screen, and I guess we don't need Leo to vote for this.
No, we could mark him down as non-recorded.
All right, so I'll vote aye then.
And I will vote aye. So that was a 4-0 vote. I think we just dropped down to all the people we want to have. Anybody see somebody? And you can go ahead and stop recording, Rachel. And